Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into one of the most pivotal events in all of history, the resurrection of Jesus. We're going to look at the case for it, pulling from the Gospel of Luke and a modern analysis of its claims. Think of it like we're opening up a case file and examining the evidence, piece by piece. All right, so to get into this, let's start with a really simple question about memory. Just think for a second. What's your most memorable moment? Is it a vacation, a party? The source material we're looking at kicks off right here, suggesting that what we remember, and maybe more importantly, what we forget, well, that's incredibly revealing. You know, we kind of have a selective memory, right? We can tell you every detail of an amazing concert, but we can't remember the serious warning our friend gave us just yesterday. The text we're looking at suggests that Jesus' own followers, they were just like that. I mean, check this out. According to the Gospels, Jesus laid out the whole plan, this exact prophecy, 4 different times. He told them what was going to happen. But somehow, in all the chaos and with their own ideas of what was supposed to happen, his disciples, they just completely forgot. And because they forgot that promise, the crucifixion wasn't just some tragic turn of events. It was the absolute end of the line. It wasn't seen as one step in a bigger plan. For them, it was game over. And that led to this feeling of complete and total broken hope. Yeah, it's all over. That was the feeling in the air. I mean, can you imagine the despair? The person you literally left everything to follow, the one you believed was going to change the entire world, was just publicly executed like a criminal. For them, it was final. The story was done. Everything they'd sacrificed was for nothing. But then, this story takes this unbelievable twist. On the 3rd day, a group of women who followed Jesus went to his tomb. They were just going to perform traditional burial customs, fully expecting to find a dead body. What they found instead, well, it changed everything. So let's break down the scene they walked into, because every detail is critical here. They show up, and the massive stone that sealed the tomb, a stone they couldn't possibly have moved themselves, is rolled away. Then they go inside, and his body, it's just gone. And then, as if that's not enough, 2 figures in shining, brilliant clothes appear. This thing just went from a tragedy to a massive, profound mystery. And this is the moment. This is when that forgotten promise comes flooding back. The figures at the tomb don't just say, "Hey, he's not here." They specifically ask, "Why do you look for the living among the dead?" and remind the women of what Jesus himself had told them. This is what sets the stage for the absolute central claim of the Christian faith, the resurrection. Okay, so the source material doesn't just leave it at that. It doesn't just say, "Believe this." It actually lays out 5 distinct lines of evidence, almost like an investigator's report. So let's open up this case file and go through these arguments one by one. Proof number 1 is all about the accuracy of the record. This gets into a field called textual criticism, but the question is really simple. Can we actually trust the documents we have? Is the story we read today the same one that was written down 2,000 years ago? And this chart, wow, it really tells the story. Look at this. When you put the New Testament up against another hugely important ancient text, like Homer's Iliad, the difference is just staggering. We have something like 24,000 manuscript copies of the New Testament. The error rate between them is a tiny 0.5%, and most of that is just stuff like spelling differences. With that many copies, historians can cross-check everything and be incredibly confident they've got the original text. All right, the second piece of evidence has to do with timing. It's about the clock. How long did it take for these stories to actually get written down after they happened? And this is so important because the longer you wait, the more time there is for myths and legends to creep in and distort the original story. This timeline really puts it all into perspective, doesn't it? For huge historical figures like Alexander the Great or Confucius, the first real biographies were written more than 400 years after they died. 4 centuries! But the accounts of Jesus? They were written down within about 60 years. That's well within the lifetime of people who were actually there and could have stood up and said, "Hey, that's not how it happened." Okay, proof number 3. This one's a little more subtle, but it's really fascinating. It focuses on who the story says were the very first witnesses to the empty tomb, the women. So, why women? Why were they the first witnesses? From our perspective today, that doesn't seem like a big deal at all. But in the world of first-century Judea, this detail is, according to the source, a massive clue pointing to the story's authenticity. See, in that culture, at that time, a woman's testimony wasn't considered legally valid. It wouldn't hold up in court. To have a credible testimony, you needed at least two adult men. So here's the point the source makes. If you were making this story up, if you were trying to create the most believable, convincing story you possibly could, you would never make women your star witnesses. The only reason to write it this way, the argument goes, is because that's just how it happened. Now for the fourth line of evidence. This one tackles a theory you might have heard before, the idea that Jesus didn't really die on the cross, but that he just fainted or swooned, and then woke up later in the tomb. To look at this, the source points to a study published in, of all places, the prestigious Journal of the American Medical Association. A team of doctors actually analyzed the medical reality of crucifixion. Their conclusion? Death was certain. It would have resulted from a whole host of factors: shock, suffocation, heart failure. The idea that someone could survive that, let alone push aside a massive stone and walk away, well, from a modern medical perspective, it's just not viable. And that brings us to the fifth and final piece of evidence. And for a lot of people, this is the most powerful one. It isn't about ancient manuscripts or medical journals, it's about people. It's about the radical, undeniable, and frankly, overnight transformation of Jesus' disciples. And this comparison says it all. I mean, look at the before. They were scared, disillusioned, hiding behind locked doors, terrified they'd be next. And after, they became bold, public preachers, willing to face down the very authorities who killed Jesus. They were unified, and every single one of them, except for one, died as a martyr. The source poses the question, would people do that? Would they die for something they knew was a lie? So, after looking at all this evidence, the documents, the timing, the witnesses, the medical facts, the changed lives, what's the big takeaway? What's the point of all this? The source brings all these threads together for a really powerful concluding argument about what this story is really all about. The logic pretty much goes like this. First, the evidence is there to show this was a real historical event. But second, the point isn't just to win a history debate. The point is that this event completely flips the script on the human story, from one that ends in finality to one that's full of hope. And third, that hope is presented as a victory over the ultimate enemies, death and despair. And what does that hope actually look like in real life? Well, according to the text, it's a hope that gives you a whole new way to look at life's biggest struggles. It's about finding purpose, even in suffering. It's about forgiveness. And it's about transforming that paralyzing fear into real courage by claiming victory over death itself. So at the end of the day, this explainer of the source material leaves us right here. It frames this whole incredible account not just as a historical puzzle to be solved, but as a potential answer to that universal human feeling of despair. And it leaves us with one last big question to think about. How powerful can a story be, especially one backed by this kind of evidence, to completely reshape our very definition of what it means to have hope?